The lights flickered, then total darkness. At 31,000 feet above ground, both engines failed. The plane dropped. Oxygen masks fell. People screamed. A child cried out for his mother, and in the chaos, a flight attendant pointed to seat 18A and shouted, "Her, now she's the one." All eyes turned. A quiet woman, early 30s, wearing an old gray hoodie and noise-canceling headphones, slowly stood up. A man nearby scoffed. What's she gonna do? Blog about it? But she didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She just walked calmly toward the cockpit. 10 minutes later, she was holding the yoke. Not a co-pilot, not a passenger, but a decorated Air Force instructor, trained to land aircraft in blackout storms. Without engines. That day, 163 souls were saved, because a woman most people ignored. Didn't ignore the signs, and that was just the beginning. Because before the plane could touch the ground, a second threat emerged. One that couldn't be fixed by flying skill alone. What happened next is something pilots still whisper about. In flight schools across the country, the runway she chose had been closed for over a decade. And yet, she landed there like she'd flown it yesterday. She hadn't just saved a flight. She rewrote every rule in the emergency manual, then walked away. Without a word. If you've ever believed that true heroes don't wear capes, but hoodies and silence, you need to hear this story through, to the end. And if life pulls you away halfway through, go ahead and hit subscribe now, so you won't miss this, or the next true story of calm hands and quiet legends. Because sometimes, the person we underestimate the most is the one who knows exactly what to do when everything goes wrong. They boarded the flight like any other group of travelers. Some were heading home, some to work, some to new beginnings they hadn't even told their families about. No one paid much attention to the woman in seat 18A. She wore an old hoodie, navy blue joggers, and a pair of running shoes that had seen better days. She had no makeup on, no jewelry, no laptop or phone constantly glowing in her hands. To most people, she looked like someone who read too much and slept too little. Maybe a school teacher. Maybe a librarian who secretly wrote poetry no one would ever read, and she was fine with that. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just existed, quiet, still, present. The older gentleman seated beside her had tried to strike up a conversation. He asked if she was traveling for work. She offered a polite smile, a soft "just visiting." Then she returned to her book, its title covered with a faded paper sleeve. The plane was flying over Nebraska when it happened. At first, it was just a sound, a sharp metallic pop, like someone had snapped a giant rubber band beneath the floor. Most passengers didn't even flinch. They thought it was turbulence, or maybe someone dropping a heavy suitcase below deck. But the woman in 18A, she stopped reading, she closed her book, and she listened. A second sound followed, deeper, longer. Then came the tremor, barely noticeable, but constant. She placed her hand lightly on the armrest. Her fingers could feel it, a vibration no regular traveler would recognize. But she did. 2 rows back, a baby began to cry. Up front, a flight attendant reached for the intercom, then froze. The overhead lights blinked once, then died. That's when the gasp started, followed by a kind of silence only heard when fear hasn't found words yet. The oxygen masks fell. A woman screamed. A teenage boy tried to laugh until he saw his father's face go pale. Then came the dip. The plane wasn't gliding. It was falling. In the cockpit, the pilots fought to regain control, but nothing was working. The main engine had failed. Then, the second. Within seconds, they lost full thrust. Inside the cabin, people were starting to break. The older gentleman beside 18 reached for her hand. He didn't say a word, just gripped it tight. She let him. In the middle of that chaos, the unthinkable happened. A flight attendant, eyes wild with urgency, unbuckled from her seat and started sprinting down the aisle. She wasn't heading for the phone. She wasn't looking for a crew member. She was heading straight for seat 18A. The cabin watched as she pointed. "You," she said. "We need you now." The woman blinked. Not in surprise, but like someone waking from a deep thought. The man beside her looked confused. "Wait, what, her?" He turned to the flight attendant. "She's reading a book about plants." But the flight attendant's voice was firm. "She's not who you think she is." Without a word, the woman in 18A stood. She handed her book to the man beside her. "It's not about plants," she said softly. Then walked toward the cockpit. "Now, if you've ever doubted that someone quiet could hold a storm in their bones, you may want to keep listening. And if life gets in the way halfway through, go ahead and hit subscribe. That way, when you're ready, this story and the ones just like it will be waiting for you. Because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about ordinary people." The cockpit had gone quiet, but not in the peaceful kind of way. Captain Holbrook, a veteran of 25 years, was staring at his control panel like it had just betrayed him. Beside him, First Officer Lennox was tapping switches that no longer responded. Nothing. No engine thrust. No auxiliary power. No hydraulics. No backup lights. They were, for all intents and purposes, flying a steel brick through cold sky. Back in the cabin, time didn't feel real. It slowed. People were whispering prayers, or frozen in place, gripping armrests like they were lifelines. Somewhere in row 22, a young man was fumbling with his phone, trying to send a goodbye text, not knowing it would never send. An elderly woman reached into her purse and clutched a photograph of her late husband. She didn't cry. She just looked at it and whispered his name. At the front, a child let out a high, panicked scream. His mother tried to calm him, but her hands were shaking too hard to buckle his mask. A woman in business attire clutched the seat back in front of her and said loudly, "This is it. This is really it." And for a moment, it did feel like the end. The air had that sharp, sterile taste. The kind that comes right before something breaks. But not everyone was frozen. In the narrow space between first class and the cockpit, Flight Attendant Karen McNally was moving, not aimlessly, not in fear. With purpose. She reached the locked cockpit door, tapped a code, waited. No answer. She knocked once, then twice. Nothing. She turned to the lead attendant, whispering, "They're not responding. I think they're out." The other woman swallowed hard. "God help us." Then Karen looked down the aisle, straight toward seat 18A. She didn't hesitate. When she reached Mara, she didn't ask. She commanded. "You," she said. "Now." Mara stood. No panic, no confusion. Just steady breath, eyes forward. A teenager nearby tried to laugh. "Wait, are they letting passengers fly now?" But then he saw Karen's face and stopped. The man in the aisle seat looked up and muttered, "Is this real life?" Mara walked past the carts, past the fearful faces, toward the locked door. Karen tapped the override again. The door opened with a sluggish hiss. Inside, both pilots were slumped in their seats, still breathing barely, but unconscious. The emergency oxygen systems had failed, and without cabin pressure correction, they were fading fast. Mara stepped in. She didn't gasp. She didn't swear. She just moved. She pulled Captain Holbrook back gently, laid him against the seat wall, checked his vitals, then took his place. Her hands reached for switches instinctively. She knew this layout. 737 variants had slight differences, but to her, this was muscle memory. She flicked open a buried panel, disabled the emergency autopilot override, and the aircraft immediately stopped fighting itself. The drop slowed. The air leveled, still falling, but not spiraling. Karen leaned in, voice trembling. "Ma'am, who exactly are you?" Mara didn't look up. Her voice was calm, steady. "Mara Ellison. Former Air National Guard. Flight Instructor Emergency Ops. 4 years training crews for black sky descents." Karen blinked. "You're actually a pilot?" "At 31,000 feet with no engines," Mara said. "I'm the best shock you've got." For a moment, even Karen had no words. Then she whispered, "Thank God you were on this flight." Back in the cabin, the change was subtle but real. People felt it. The plane wasn't shaking anymore. They weren't nosediving. They were gliding, still in danger, but in the hands of someone who somehow knew exactly what to do. And somewhere in the back of the plane, a quiet prayer ended with a breath that sounded a little less afraid. Now, if this story has your heart beating a little faster, you might want to subscribe so you won't miss what happens when Mara finds out this crisis wasn't just mechanical, because the next TWIST wasn't in the sky. It was hidden inside the plane itself. The cockpit smelled like metal, sweat, and something faintly electrical. Wires buzzed faintly behind the panels, systems half alive but confused. The kind of confusion machines get when they've been asked to do something impossible. And almost succeeded. Mara slid into the left seat captain's side. It fit her like an old jacket, worn but familiar. Her fingers moved without needing to think, flipping switches, scanning gauges, testing what remained. The artificial horizon was offline. Primary navigation? Gone. She'd have to rely on backup altimeters, the compass, and her own instincts. Lennox, the first officer, let out a low moan, still unconscious. His oxygen mask dangled uselessly at his side. Mara adjusted the flow valve manually and repositioned his seat for stability. Then she turned to the comms. Panel. Dead. But not for long. She traced a wire to an auxiliary power feed and rerouted current using a trick she hadn't used since a training op in Nevada. A trick, by the way, that got her chewed out at the time. But it worked. The radio crackled. "Flight 191. Come in, do you copy? This is Greensboro Tower. You've gone dark. Please respond." Mara leaned in. "This is Flight 191. Pilot Mara Ellison assuming command. Crew is unconscious due to oxygen system failure. Aircraft is experiencing complete dual engine loss. Glide. Slope initiated. Requesting emergency vectors to nearest runway with length minimum 7,000 feet. Confirm." There was a pause. Then a voice firm, disbelieving. "Flight 191. Confirm your name again." "Mara Ellison. Former Air Guard. 184th Wing. Current civilian multi-engine certified. Emergency command assumed under crisis protocol." Inside the tower, men and women stopped what they were doing. A veteran air traffic supervisor stood slowly from his chair. Did she say Mara Ellison? They knew the name. She wasn't famous. Not in the traditional sense. But in their world, she was. A myth. The kind of pilot who trained others to stay calm when nothing made sense. The one who landed a C-130 with a blown wing in a thunderstorm and walked away like it was nothing. The tower responded. "Flight 191, you have absolute priority. Recommend. Runway 14L, wind at 9 knots, clear weather. Crash crews are standing by." "Copy that," Mara replied. Then she looked around the cockpit and noticed something strange. The circuit breaker for engine power had been manually pulled. Twice. Her eyes narrowed. Someone had disabled the plane. On purpose, but this wasn't the time. Survival first. Questions later. Back in the cabin, tension still lingered, but the fear was different now. A woman leaned across the aisle and asked softly, "Is it true? The girl's flying the plane?" A teenage boy nodded. "Yeah, and she's not just flying it. She's landing it." Someone chuckled. It wasn't mocking. Just the kind of bewildered laugh people make when the impossible starts to feel Possible. In row 22. The man who had tried to text earlier was now helping a grandmother steady her oxygen mask. You think we'll make it? She whispered. He hesitated. Then smiled. We've got a glider and a legend flying it. I think we've got a chance. In the cockpit, Mara was calculating descent rates. She drew lines with her fingers across the panel imaginary trajectories, cross-checking wind drift against glide angle. No engine meant no second chances. She had one shot. If she overshot, they'd crash into a business park. If she came in short, the landing gear would catch the edge of the woods. She needed perfection. And then a memory hit her. Her father, also a pilot, once said, landing a dead bird isn't about skill. It's about nerve. You can have all the training in the world, but when the ground's rushing up at you, you either breathe slow or you don't breathe at all. She whispered it aloud now, not for anyone else, just to remind herself. In the back of her mind, something still itched. The breaker. Why was it pulled? She filed it away. Get them on the ground first, then dig into the why. Greensboro, this is Flight 191. Beginning final approach. Gear down. Flaps extended. Wind confirmed. See you on the runway. And for a moment, just a flicker, she smiled. A small one, the kind of smile you make when you know you're doing exactly what you were born to do. The cockpit smelled like burnt wires and desperation. Captain Morales was still conscious, but barely. His breathing was shallow, uneven eyes flickering between control gauges and the flickering horizon. Beside him, the first officer was slumped against the seat, completely unresponsive. Mara stepped in without asking. She didn't shout, didn't announce herself. She simply sat down. With the calm of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment 1,000 times in silence, she buckled. Inflict 3 switches in rapid succession. Then reached for the backup oxygen valve behind the captain's head, twisting it with precision. Captain Morales blinked, then nodded. Not a word needed. Mara placed one hand on the yoke. It was trembling from the resistance of the wind. The aircraft was losing altitude fast. She scanned the instrument panel. Left engine, dead. Right engine, sputtering intermittently, RPMs falling. Hydraulics, compromised but functional. Autopilot, disengaged and fighting manual inputs. Then came the sound she had been waiting for, the metallic thunk of the auxiliary. Battery system failing. Emergency power was gone. From here on, it was human against gravity. Behind her, the flight attendant Sandra stood frozen. She'd seen confident people panic before. She'd seen self-proclaimed experts choke under pressure. But Mara? She wasn't performing. She was restoring order. You were military, weren't you? Sandra asked quietly. Mara didn't answer immediately. Her fingers were busy rerouting the avionics bus through a lesser-known emergency channel. Air National Guard. She finally replied. Ka-130s, night missions, emergency descent instructor. Sandra's mouth parted in disbelief. You're a damn ghost story we tell the rookies, she whispered. Mara didn't react. She was calculating glide slope, wind shear, and terrain all in her head. Down in the cabin, the chaos hadn't stopped. Children were crying. A man was trying to call his wife with no signal. Someone was praying out loud in Spanish, but others, they noticed something. The trembling in the aircraft had slowed. The wild tilt was gone. The nose, once dipping aggressively, was now level steady. Someone whispered, "Did she do that?" Back in the cockpit, Mara toggled the emergency com switch. Dead. She tried the transponder beacon. Nothing. She reached under the seat and pulled a cable from her own carry-on. Plugged it into the nav panel's exposed port. Her personal GPS monitor flickered to life. It wasn't military grade anymore, but it would be enough. She exhaled through her nose, adjusted the trim manually, and spoke her first command since entering. Captain, I'll need your help verifying the checklist. You good? A weak thumbs up. It was enough. Together, they began. Running through the dead stick landing protocol, a procedure that most commercial pilots had only practiced in simulators and never completed in real life. Mara's voice remained low, even, flap positions set, manual pitch trim adjusted. Landing gear will remain retracted until final approach. Captain Morales murmured, "Where are we aiming?" Mara checked her GPS. Greensboro. "If the winds hold, we can glide her in. But we'll need priority airspace." Total radio blackout. Then how? She smiled faintly for the first time. "I have a friend." And then, the moment came. She banked the aircraft gently, precisely 12 degrees. The wings groaned, but held. Her muscles remembered. She hadn't touched a control yoke in over 3 years, but her instincts? Still sharp. Still dangerous. Still hers. In the back of the plane, a flight attendant whispered to a teenage girl, "Don't worry, sweetie. That woman up front? She's flown in places you wouldn't believe." The girl asked, "Is she the pilot now?" The flight attendant looked forward toward the closed cockpit door, then nodded. "She is now." The runway was now visible in full, lit like a silver ribbon beneath the fading sky. Mara's hands danced across the panel, adjusting trim and managing pitch. But her eyes kept drifting back to that one thing she couldn't ignore. The pulled breaker. In aviation, systems fail, but they don't sabotage themselves. Someone had flipped that switch, but who? And why? No time to answer that now. Her focus had to return to what she could still control. She stabilized the flaps, feathered the dead engines to reduce drag, and pulled the radio microphone closer. "This is Flight 191. On glide approach, runway 14L, all passengers secured. Final systems check in progress." A pause. Then the tower replied, "Copy, Flight 191. Crash units in position. Weather is holding steady. You're doing great, ma'am." The voice was firm, supportive, but there was something else beneath it, like they knew more than they were letting on. Mara didn't have the luxury of digging deeper. Not yet. She ran another check of her remaining displays. Fuel? Drained. Pressure? Stabilized. Landing gear? Locked and confirmed. Then came a crackle on a separate channel, one reserved for military override. "Mara, this is Echo Command. We've been monitoring your transmission. You are not alone up there." She froze, not out of fear, out of recognition. The voice belonged to Colonel Darius Flynn, her former commanding officer. The one who trained her. The one who once told her, "You're the kind of pilot that makes calm contagious." "Colonel Flynn," she responded. "I take it you know what's happening here." "We know more than we're allowed to say over unsecured lines," he replied. "But listen closely. That plane you're flying, it wasn't just a random malfunction. It was targeted." Targeted. The word hit her like turbulence. "Targeted how?" she asked. "There was a code injected into the electrical routing bus. Remote access. Untraceable from the outside, unless you know where to look." Mara glanced again at the pulled breaker. "Manual override was triggered from inside," she said flatly. "Someone on board knew what they were doing." Colonel Flynn's voice dropped to a near whisper. "We believe so. And that someone may not want you to land that plane." The air in the cockpit felt heavier. "Understood," Mara said. She didn't panic. She never did. But her mind raced through possibilities. Could it be a disgruntled employee? A test of a hijack protocol? Something more political? She filed it away. Again. Survival first. Answers later. In the cabin, passengers were bracing. Some closed their eyes. Some gripped hands. Some whispered prayers, but all of them now were watching the front of the plane like it was the edge of heaven itself. In row 8, an older gentleman leaned forward and said, "If we make it, I'm buying stock in noise-canceling headphones and hoodies." The man next to him chuckled. "We underestimated her. We all did." Up front, Mara pressed the intercom. Her voice echoed softly through the cabin. "This is your acting pilot speaking. We are 2 minutes from runway contact. Brace position confirmed. We're going to land this plane together." A moment of silence. Then a round of quiet nods, tears, and whispered encouragement passed through the rows like a current down below. The fire crews stood ready inside the control tower. All chatter had stopped. Colonel Flynn was still on the line. "We're clearing airspace for your descent. Expect military escort upon landing. You'll be debriefed thoroughly." Mara smiled faintly. "I figured. And Mara," he added, "I've never been prouder." She exhaled, then clicked back to the tower frequency. "Greensboro. Final glide path confirmed. Speed 124 knots. Touchdown projected in 90 seconds. Copy that. Flight 191. Runway is yours." As the ground drew nearer, a strange calm overtook her. Not fear, not pressure. Just presence. Total. Focused presence. She wasn't the quiet girl in seat 180 anymore. She was the woman who'd seen fire, ice, and systems fail, and still brought the plane home. The tarmac grew closer. The gear lowered with a metallic groan. One final breath, and Mara whispered to herself, "Bring them home." The wheels hit the runway. Not with a crash, but with a clean, calculated kiss. The kind only a seasoned pilot could deliver. Passengers gasped, then burst into cheers. A few cried. Some just sat in stunned silence, unable to believe what had just happened. But Mara didn't celebrate. Her hands stayed firm on the controls. Her eyes scanned every dial, every backup system. The 737 slowed and stopped. Alive. Everyone was alive. Flight 191. This is Greensboro Tower. Emergency response en route. Hold position. Mara acknowledged, then powered down what was left of the systems. She exhaled, slow and steady. But before relief could settle in, a message blinked across a tiny maintenance screen. Secondary trigger active. She stared at it. What? No, the aircraft was down. It was over, wasn't it? A deep unease spread through her chest. Then the smell hit her, faint, like warm electronics, and plastic melting. She reached under the console. A thin trail of smoke. It wasn't over. She turned to the intercom. "This is your pilot. Remain seated. Emergency crews will board shortly. Stay calm." She stood up. Every part of her ached, but adrenaline kept her moving. She pushed open the cockpit door and stepped into the cabin. Sandra, the flight attendant, met her near row 10. "Mara, something's wrong in the back." "What is it?" "Someone's missing." That stopped her cold. "What do you mean?" "We've accounted for 134 passengers," Sandra said, voice shaking. "There should be 137. Mara's mind raced. "Are we sure? We checked twice. And one of the galley doors, it's been tampered with from the inside." Mara's heart sank. There wasn't just an equipment failure. There was a sleeper agent on board. And they were still active. "Evacuation is coming," Mara muttered, eyes narrowing. "But if we let people off now, we could be walking them into another trap." She stepped past Sandra and walked toward the rear. The cabin was tense. Passengers watching her every step. Some smiling, thinking it was all over. Others sensing something still hung in the air. Near the aft galley, she noticed the latch panel under the floor dash ajar. She knelt. No tools, no flashlight. Just instinct. She eased the panel open and saw a small black box, wires trailing into the insulation. No blinking lights, just stillness. But her gut knew this was the secondary threat, not a bomb. Something more precise, a communications scrambler, military grade. One that could cut every signal within 200 yards, then fry circuits remotely. Clever. She muttered, "Disable the plane, scramble the landing." And if it still made it down? Silence the scene before help could arrive. She leaned forward to remove it, then heard a voice behind her. "Step away." She didn't move. I said, "Step away." She rose slowly. Behind her stood a man, late 40s, wearing a navy jacket. Face pale, hands trembling, but holding something unmistakable. A switch, remote trigger. "You don't have to do this," Mara said quietly. "I already did," he said. "Why?" He didn't answer. His eyes were wild but sad. Almost desperate. "You're just a pilot," he said. "You wouldn't understand." Mara stepped slightly to the side, angling herself between him and the hatch. "I'm not just a pilot," she said. "I'm someone who trained to face pressure like this." "But you're sweating. You're shaking. You didn't plan to survive this either, did you?" He looked down. Just for a second. It was enough. Mara stepped forward, grabbed. His wrist twisted. The trigger dropped to the floor. He stumbled back. Sandra arrived behind him with 2 other passengers, both off duty. Military. They took the man down without a word. Mara stared at the scrambler. Carefully, she cut the leads. One, then the next. The cabin lights flickered, then steadied. The threat was over, for real, this time. She looked back at the passengers, dozens of faces watching, waiting. And finally, she allowed herself a smile. "You're safe," she said. And this time, she meant it. Mara stood at the rear of the plane as the last echoes of shouting died down. The rogue passenger had been restrained, the device neutralized. But her work wasn't finished. She walked slowly back toward the cockpit, pausing as she passed the rows of passengers. Each face turned toward her, silent, grateful, awestruck. Some had tears in their eyes, some smiled softly. But no one spoke. There was something sacred about the silence, as if words couldn't measure what had just happened. Mara sat again in the left seat. Greensboro Tower came back on the radio. "Flight 191, your cabin is reporting stabilized. Confirming, no injuries. Is that correct?" She took the mic. "Correct. All souls accounted for. Threat eliminated. We're requesting final shutdown clearance." A pause. Then a different voice came on. Calm, measured, deeply respectful. "Flight 191. This is FAA Ops Chief Russell Callahan. You have permission for full shutdown. We'll take it from here. But, Miss Ellison, that was the most impossible landing we've ever seen." She didn't answer at first. Because even she wasn't sure how it had all worked. The crosswinds, the complete engine failure, the manipulated systems, the onboard sabotage. And yet, the aircraft was intact. Not a single passenger harmed. Not a bolt out of place. She had turned a 3-hour flight into a 38-minute miracle. Outside, emergency teams approached carefully, but no one touched the doors until she gave the go-ahead. When the door finally opened, a wave of fresh air filled the cabin. People began to exhale, truly and fully. For the first time since the first engine died, Mara stood, stretched, and stepped out into the corridor. No cheering crowd, no applause, just nods. Quiet nods. The kind that come from people who know. People who understand what true skill under pressure looks like. A senior FAA investigator met her at the bottom of the stairs. He held a clipboard, but didn't look at it. "You ever land something like this before?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "Not in commercial traffic. Military?" She nodded. He sighed. "Well," he said, "we're about to rewrite every training manual in the book." He offered a smile, tired, genuine. But she wasn't thinking about handbooks. She was thinking about something else. Something that had sat in the back of her mind for years. Years ago, on a runway in Nevada, she and her flight instructor had simulated an engine-out glide. The winds were brutal. The weight off balance. She had failed the exercise. After the landing, her instructor said, "One day, you're going to face a moment when the systems fail. The odds don't care. and the world is watching. And when that day comes, don't land the plane for your reputation. Land it for the people you'll never meet again. That day had come, and somehow she'd done it. The impossible landing wasn't about technical perfection. It was about deciding not to quit, not when the second engine failed, not when the panel shorted, not when the saboteur stood behind her. She had flown through fear. She had navigated chaos. And she had landed against every rule, every stat, every probability inside. The terminal, the press was already gathering. Phones, cameras, live feeds. Mara pulled her hoodie up over her head. A security officer stepped in, offering her a discreet side exit. She took it. Fame had never been her goal. Survival was, but as she walked down the quiet hall toward the waiting room, someone was waiting. Colonel Darius Flynn, still in uniform. Still wearing that same steel-eyed expression from years ago. He nodded once. "You made it," he said. She nodded back. "You saw the report?" "Every line," he said. "I also saw the maneuvering. The trim work, that landing. I couldn't have done it better myself," she smiled. "You taught me." He shook his head. "I taught a dozen others. Only one turned it into instinct." He reached into his coat and handed her a folder. Inside was a single photo. Her sitting in the cockpit. Eyes focused, hands steady. He said, "This photo won't be released to the press, but it'll hang at the Air National Guard Museum." Next to the words, "The day silence spoke loudest." Mara looked at it for a long moment. She didn't cry, didn't tremble. She just nodded that the impossible had been done, not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but for every life sitting behind her, and maybe, just maybe, for herself. 3 days after the landing, Flight 191 was removed from the tarmac. No grand ceremony. No parade. Just a quiet crew, wheeling the aircraft into a secure hangar in North Carolina. Its undercarriage still dusty from that miracle glide. Mara Ellison didn't attend. She was already gone. Not hiding. Just back to where she felt most comfortable, behind the scenes. Reporters called her a mystery. Bloggers speculated about her background. Some said she was ex-CIA. Others claimed she vanished into witness protection. The truth was simpler. She went home, a small house on a quiet street near Charleston. No cameras. No press. Just early sunrises, fresh coffee, and the sound of waves. The FAA sent her a formal letter, an invitation to speak at a safety symposium in D.C. She declined. Instead, she sent back a note in her own handwriting. "If I speak, it'll be for pilots who are still learning, not the ones who've forgotten why they started flying." Weeks passed, then months. The headlines faded. The YouTube clips slowed. The internet moved on, but not the aviation world. Inside the Air National Guard Academy, instructors began using her landing as a case study. How she handled electrical failure. How she maintained glide path without power. How she kept passengers calm without ever saying much at all. Her name became something whispered in hangars, not shouted, respected. One instructor summed it up best. She proved that the person who doesn't speak loudest might still know what to do when the world gets quiet. Passengers from Flight 191 formed a group chat. It started as a place to share memories, then grew into something more. Some met for coffee. Others traveled together. One woman, who had once feared flying, earned her private pilot license, all because of the woman in the HOODIE. Another passenger, a retired school principal, framed his boarding pass, hung it in his hallway next to the words, "Saved by a stranger I never even got to thank." And then there was seat 17A. It stayed empty. Over the next year, the same plane was used for over 90 flights. Each time, 17A was blocked out during check in. Not for maintenance, not for technical reasons. It was left untouched. Flight attendants noticed. Gate agents nodded. Nobody said anything official, but it became known in whispers as Mara's seat. And when other pilots sat in the cockpit, they'd glance at the passenger manifest, then smile quietly. It was a way of saying, we remember. One snowy evening, almost a year later, Mara stood near a small municipal runway, hands in her pockets, watching a young student pilot land a single-engine Cessna just a little too hard. She didn't laugh. She didn't critique. She waited until the girl stepped out, face flushed, heart racing, and said simply, "You flared. Too early, but you didn't panic. That's more than most." The girl blinked. "Are you a flight instructor?" Mara shrugged. "Sometimes." She handed the girl a folded paper. Inside was a checklist, one she had written herself years ago. At the bottom, one line: "Don't fly for glory. Fly for those who don't know how to land." Today, Mara Ellison still flies, but not on commercial routes. Not in uniform. Not on anyone's schedule. Sometimes you'll spot her in small towns, fueling a twin engine at a dusty airfield. Sometimes she's just a name on the ATC log. Calm voice, clean radio work, always polite. But if you ever board a plane and row 17 is open, and the flight crew seems especially alert that day, you'll know, somewhere out there, the sky still belongs to the woman who once brought a powerless jet and 136 souls safely back to Earth, and she did it quietly. As an aviation professional with over 30 years in the field, I can tell you what Mara Ellison achieved was not just rare. It was nearly impossible. A powerless glide, a saboteur on board, no cockpit support. And yet, she brought every single soul home, not through luck, through preparation, instinct, and something the textbooks don't teach: quiet resolve. It reminds us all heroes don't always wear uniforms or seek attention. Sometimes they sit in seat 17, a hoodie up, watching, listening, ready. What would you have done in her place? Would you have trusted her when she stood? Would you have recognized her calm as courage? Tell us in the comments, what moment in this story hit you hardest? And if stories like this move you, stories of ordinary people doing the extraordinary, make sure to subscribe, so you never miss a moment that might just change how you see the world. Because sometimes, the quietest voices leave the loudest echoes. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.